Hi, it's Peter Beale from Local Land Services at Taree. Just introducing you to Josh Hack, who'll be doing a short video in a minute. We're going to cover some of the seasonal conditions. So 2022 has been a really wet year. Rain started back in December but kept going through, and then early March we had over 125 mils. It's created, right on sowing, a very wet environment, exceptionally wet. If we look at the charts, the accumulated rainfall has certainly gone up, and the soils remain saturated at the surface most of the time. And that's brought a lot of issues about access. It's delayed our sowing. Kikea's been able to get away and smother what early ryegrass was sown, and generally our whole sowing program's well back. The other things that we've learnt through that time is that in many cases the sowings failed because things were too wet, and really quite a disappointing result for people who tried to get in early, and often they've just had to leave it and come back again. So we just wanted to look at some of the different issues, the season, how the growth rates have been down because of low solar radiation, but also because of waterlogging, and some of the nitrogen issues that although nitrogen's really expensive this year, we're getting difficulty about knowing when to apply it, and quite nitrogen deficient situations because the waterlogging actually does reduce nitrogen availability and actually increase losses. So we just got this short video to go through some of these issues with Josh Hack and myself, just some of the experiences we've learnt, and hopefully that'll be a good resource for the future.
Hi everyone, how are you going? My name's Josh Hack from Ag Farming Systems. Look, we just want to have a quick chat and have a look at some of the learnings and some of the observations we've had over the last 3 months of some of the sowings and success and also failures of our winter pastures. It's been a challenging 3 months. The flooding that's gone on up on the north coast and southern Queensland is absolutely extreme. Last year around Taree here we copped the March floods as well, and this year we've seen well above average rainfalls, extreme conditions, lack of sun, and some challenging environmental conditions to try and get our winter pastures established and also try and get cows around, etc. So we just want to have a look and see what have we done and what has some of the farmers done that has worked and what hasn't worked, and what's some of the things we need to learn from going forward, especially with the prediction of more wetter conditions to come as well. So we need to make sure that we try and not make the same mistakes twice, but also learn what has worked for some people and what hasn't. So first of all, going forward, the continual wet conditions that we've had this year has really been worse than our March floods, which were extreme floods last year. But last year we got the floods, then it dried out and we were able to get some pasture away. This year the extreme conditions with the continual rainfall has really caused havoc at trying to get some success of our pastures to get away. So going into that, so what has that meant? So look, early on there was a bit of direct drilling going on, and I'd still advocate that if you can really get tractors on paddocks and you can use direct drill gear and the paddocks can handle that, it's still the best option to try and get that seed to soil contact to get that plant up and going and established. However, this year has seen more than most that we haven't been able to get any tractors near paddocks, etc., and that's meant that we've had to do some broadcasting of seed. Now, when we talk about broadcasting, one of the main reasons whether we don't broadcast is because we want to get that seed to soil contact, and we want to try and get that moisture around the seed. So moisture hasn't been a problem this year. Some of the paddocks haven't had as much trash on them, so we've been able to go through and spread that as well. So broadcasting has been very successful, and the closer we get to winter, the more successful the broadcasting is compared to direct drilling. So broadcasting by far is still a really good tool to use, and which way we've done that this year has been whether we've been using a tractor and a spreader if you can get a tractor on, also ATVs and quads with other gear and electric spreaders that go on the back, and or tow behind type of quads have been very successful as well. and also things like helicopters, and more so this year, which has been a new addition to the way things are going, and with newer technology coming along, and that's been drones. And drones have been quite effective at being able to get across the country as well, and get some of that hectares done. So all of these things have been all hit and miss. So we want to talk today about what have been the main things that we've seen while we keep on getting failures in those paddocks, and what are some of the things that gives us a success as well. So the success for me has been really about where the water has been. So when we're going out there to spread our ryegrass or our smaller seeds, to try and get establishment in our clovers, where we've had laying sitting water is where we've had most of the failures. Okay, so whether it's been with the helicopter, the drone, or spreading with a bike, etc., etc. When we've got water laying there and we're putting seed on that water, and if that water's going to be hanging around for more than a few days, that's where we've seen that we just haven't had the success at all. So the problem is with that, and Peter Bill will talk more about the reasons for that and the oxygen and all that sort of stuff in a minute, but that's been the most clearest thing that I've seen is wherever we've gone and spread any seed and there's been water lying, or it's had water, more rainfall in that 10 to 14 days after that application, that's where we've seen the failures. Where we've been able to get some seed on, okay, and it might be a bit muddy, might be a bit wet, and that's okay, but we've been able to get that on and get good seed to soil contact. So we want that seed to get down into that soil, so maybe running the mulch behind, or just running some harrows behind, or anything to try and make that seed to get down in the canopy. Another tool that's been used a lot this year is going along and spreading and then putting the cows in after it for 1 to 2 days, and allowing those cows to push that seed through that canopy of thatch if it's there, and shake it down into that soil, has also been working well as well. But where we've been able to get that seed to soil contact, and then we've had some sun and some germination, okay, and we've got it up that 10 to 14 to 15 days and out of the ground, that plant can then start to see the sun and photosynthesize. So then it's starting to create its own energy. That's where we've had the most success. So where that plant's come up, it's been able to get out to the sun, and then even if rain comes after that and we do get a bit of water lying, as long as that plant's out of the water, it can handle a fair bit of water and a bit of water logging. Gets a bit crook, but it's also able to handle it. It's that period of germination that is the most critical time, that we don't want water lying there for multiple of reasons, which Peter Bill will go into in a minute. So the biggest learning for me this year has been select those paddocks, select those parts of paddocks. I've been to farms where we've said we're only going to do half that paddock, half that paddock, and half that paddock, because they all go down into the swamp or into a low area, and because there's water lying there, we're not going to be able to do them for another 4 to 6 weeks, so we're going to do half of the paddocks. And also then selecting the paddocks that aren't going to lay water, okay? So being able to do that is really important, so we could have got it away. The second thing to that, now we've got the grass up and going, and that's all well and good, but it's been an amazing year with a lack of temperature and a lack of solar radiation because of the wet conditions, that these plants normally at 25 days, 20 days, we can actually go through and give them a quick nip if we've got kikuyu coming over to shade them. It's been very difficult this year because those plants haven't had the sun that they'd normally get in that 15 or 20 days, and they've been taking 25, 30 days to get to that stage. And that's causing some problems with some shading from kikuyu, etc. And normally we can go in and do a quick nip, and that's the right thing to do. If that plant is getting, that ryegrass plant is getting shaded, okay, the right next thing to do is to go and give it a quick nip, remove that canopy cover, okay, and allow that sun back down into that plant to keep growing. One of the biggest issues with doing that this year has been how wet it is. We've got pugging issues. Okay, so if we've been having trouble with that shading of that ryegrass, we've gone in to do the quick nip. We put the cows in to do that, which is probably the right thing to do normally. But what we're doing is this year is the pugging is actually killing the grass behind them. So we're in those catch-22 points where we're sitting there going, I don't know whether I should graze it because we need to stop the shading from the summer grass on the new ryegrass. And then if I put the cows in there, I'm going to do pugging and I'm going to destroy it as well. Now, that's just the fact of life, and we need to work out, what's the best alternative there. What I've been doing the last couple of weeks actually is working with some clients to go, look, we've got some rainfall coming. We need to go and select these paddocks that we're not going to get back onto. We've had good 6-7 days of rain. We need to get that kikuyu canopy cover off, because if we don't do it and the rain comes, we're going to be in a worse spot than we are now. Okay, so it's about hedging up the bets of what the weather's going to be doing, what your paddocks are doing, which paddocks can you put cows onto to spell them, etc, etc. One of the big things that I've also seen this year is the competition. Some of the issues around also the kikuyu outshading it, but just the competition from even stubble or thatches or rotting down material from the floods. Okay, that's really caused a big issue with our germination this year. And as you can see from some of the photos I'll put up, you'll see the difference in the ability for the plant to get up and going and start photosynthesizing when it doesn't have that shade around it, compared to when it's got a heap of thatch layers or straw layers that is going to cause some of those issues to get those plants going. So what we'll do right now is we'll flick back over to Peter Bill, and he's just going to go through some of the issues around why we haven't got success in where we've got standing water, and some of the issues trying to get germination in that standing water and the rotting down of organic matter, etc.
When ryegrass has to germinate, it actually needs oxygen from the air and usually the soil air around it. And it takes in that air, it takes in water, and then it begins the germination process. But when we get conditions that we've had this year, which are not just wet and saturated like this, but ongoing saturated, if we sow the seed into the soil at depth, that when you get saturated conditions, there's organic matter there that's breaking down organic matter, and it's actually using up the oxygen in the water, and so we get a lower and lower oxygen content, and it's just not conducive to getting seed to germinate and grow, because every part of the day the plant needs oxygen to convert the starch in the seed to energy that produces growth. So that's been one of the major limitations with this ongoing wet weather. We get a bit of oxygen and then it gets saturated like this, and we can see there's plants here on the higher ground, but where it's been just wet and sitting, there's very little ryegrass growing, and it's not doing very well. The other factor is if we sow in, and some people have had to sow into these wet conditions, the oxygen content of the water at the soil surface is reduced because the organic matter has been breaking down over time. And from my rice experience, you get toxins exuded by that breaking organic matter, and that impedes germination too. So this is part of why we've had so much difficulty this year. In a normal year, when it's wet, you get puddles, dries out, not such a problem. But this year it's just been ongoing wet, saturated with water, low oxygen content, and so the germination just hasn't been as good as we would expect. So we'll talk about some of the things you can to manage that in the next section.
Thanks very much, Peter. So moving on, so another thing to really think about this year is, and especially as we go into winter, is our nutrient. Okay, so especially nitrogen at this time of year is really important, and through winter, depending on where you are, your altitude, how cold it is, as to what sort of sources of nitrogen we should be using, but making sure that we do have some nutrient availability so we can really get those plants to get through winter, so that when we get to spring, we've got the most healthiest plants, big root systems, so we can get the most production we can. So there's a lot of nitrogen deficiency out there at the moment. Whenever we have big rainfall events, we often leach a lot of that or have nitrogen runoff as well. So a big one this year is, with nitrogen prices the way they are, quite high compared to what we're normally used to, is making sure we get the efficiency and the use out of that. Now, a couple of things is the timing. Okay, so we want to make sure we're using nitrogen as close to grazing as possible, post-grazing, so we can get the most use out of that nitrogen for that next grazing period. The application rates is really important. I recommend that you talk to someone or go through the calculations or look up Richard Eckart's YouTube videos where it talks about what sort of rates we should be using. Now that all depends on what type of species of pastures you're growing, how much clover content you have, what's your production system, and also what you're paying and what your response rate is. They're the two biggest things. So if we're going to get a really good response rate, 20 to 1, so 20 kilograms of dry matter for 1 kilo of nitrogen, it pays to put the nitrogen on to get that response if we need feed. But if we're going to be getting low responses and it's going to be cold and frosty and we're not going to get those responses for whatever reason, that might be 4 to 1, it may be best not to be applying that nitrogen because we're not going to get the response out of it. The other one too is what we're seeing here with these east coast lows and continual rainfall. We've got waterlogged soils, we're getting denitrification, so we're losing some of that nitrogen. And also if you go out and apply that nitrogen, we get a lot of rainfall, we're going to lose a lot of that nitrogen, especially if we've already got wet soils, and we're going to get 70, 80 plus mils of rainfall. You're probably going to lose that nitrogen as well. So timing of nitrogen to do with these seasonal conditions is really, really important. There's going to be some field days coming up on this, and we'll discuss it at the field days, and they're going to be coming up from everywhere from Kempsey through to Taree, Gloucester, and also down at Tocal as well. So look out for those field days close to you, and we'll discuss more detail about some of those nutrient aspects going through winter and the use of ProGib and things like that as well. So just to finish on, I just wanted to, really, some of you that listened to me talk before is I harp on about, 4 major things when we're trying to establish ryegrass or winter pastures. And the first one is light, okay? So the closer we get to winter, the less light we're going to have, okay? So we really need to get those pastures in as quickly as possible where we can, but we want that light. So if you're going to put a seed in the ground or on the ground or in the soil, we need to try and get that plant as soon as it germinates to get to the light as quickly as possible. So if you think you're going to have a big thatch layer, don't go and mulch it and put it over the top because you're just going to shade it, okay? If you've got a big standing, stubble so high and we're going to try and get plants up, we're not going to be able to get that sun down in there. So when you're looking to go and hook the planter up or put the spreader on or put some pasture into a paddock, we need to think about that light. How do we get that light to that germinating seed once it's germinating and coming out of the ground? How do we get the light to there as quickly as possible? Okay, and that's going to be the number one we want to try and achieve. The other one is temperature. Okay, normally early in the year, in March, February, we're trying to put mulch over the top to protect the seed and keep that temperature down a bit. This time of year, it's the opposite. It's starting to get cold already. We're not far away from getting to some pretty heavy frosts and stuff coming down around the corner. There's a bit of a cold blast talking about next week, so that's going to cause some issues as well. So we want to try and keep that temperature in the ground, and the quicker we can get that done between now and the next 2 to 3 weeks before we start getting really cold, you're going to get a lot more feed growing in that period of time and better germination. Okay, so the closer we go to winter, the longer it's going to take to establish. Next one is moisture. I always talk about moisture as being really, really important, and early on in the year it really is, to get that moisture in the seed, to get that imbibition of moisture, take up of the seed, to start that germination process. It's not a problem this year, and it's not a problem at the moment. It's probably, if anything, it's too much moisture, which is going to take that anaerobic environment and make it where there's no oxygen, and like Peter Bill talked about, it's going to cause some of those issues about our establishment. So, too much moisture at the moment in those paddocks is a problem. Like the last one is nutrient. Okay, so nutrient is really, really important. We're going to make sure we've got good nutrients availability to those plants going into winter as well. The one that I've never mentioned before, and I'm adding it to my list now, is oxygen. We really need to have that oxygen in the soil for the availability for that plant to be able to germinate, get established and keep going. So thanks very much for joining us. Have a wonderful day, enjoy it, look after yourselves, and hopefully this sun keeps shining. Thanks very much.